A tank crewman in Anderson, Indiana was walking past the guide lamp assembly line when the floor supervisor called him over. May 12, 1943. Mid-morning. The smell of welding smoke and hot metal filled the building. The supervisor handed him something that looked nothing like a gun. It looked like the grease gun hanging on his father's garage wall back home. 2 tubes of stamped steel spot welded together. A wire stock that folded like a coat hanger. Metal so thin he could dent it with his thumb. The supervisor asked him what he thought. The crewman said it looked like junk. The supervisor smiled. He said they'd made $15,000 that month and the Army wanted $300,000 more. 18 months later, that junk would be in more American tanks than the weapon it replaced. The Thompson submachine gun that cost 10 times as much to build. The problem started in Tunisia. March 1943. American tank crews were dying with $200 submachine guns in their hands. Not because the guns didn't work, but because there weren't enough of them to go around. The Thompson was a masterpiece. Machined steel, walnut furniture, adjustable sights. It took 15 hours of skilled labor to produce one. General Motors engineer Frederick Sampson stood in a factory in Detroit looking at production numbers that didn't add up. The Army needed 50,000 submachine guns a month. His plants were delivering 8,000. Sampson had spent his career making headlight assemblies and door handles for Chevrolets. Mass production through stamping and welding. Minimal machining. Maximum output. He knew how to make 50,000 of something in a month, but the something couldn't require skilled machinists cutting steel on lathes for hours. It had to be 2 pieces of sheet metal a worker could spot weld together in minutes. The Army Ordnance Board knew this too. In October 1941, they'd watched German submachine guns work in Poland and France. The MP-40, stamped metal, spot welds, ugly as sin, effective as hell. They'd seen the British Sten. Even uglier, even cheaper. The British were punching out Stens for $10 each while America was spending $200 on Thompsons. The math was simple and brutal. Sampson got a call from Ordnance Officer René Studler. February 6, 1941. Studler had requirements. The gun had to fire .45 ACP like the Thompson, so ammunition was interchangeable. It had to hit a 6-foot target at 50 yards 9 times out of 10. Rate of fire under 500 rounds per minute. It had to be cheap enough to throw away when it broke. That last part stopped Sampson. Throw away. Not repair. Throw away. Studler explained it like this. A tank crew trapped behind enemy lines with a broken Thompson was a tank crew that died trying to fix a $200 gun. A tank crew with a $20 gun threw it in a ditch and kept moving. Sampson called George Hyde. Hyde was a German immigrant who'd been designing submachine guns since 1933. Machinist, gunsmith, designer. He'd already created the FP-45 Liberator pistol. 1 million produced. $2.10 each. Stamped metal. Disposable. The kind of gun you dropped behind enemy lines for resistance fighters who'd use it once then throw it away. Hyde understood the assignment. October 1942. He presented his first design. The T-15. Select fire. Stamped receiver. Folding stock. Studler looked at it and changed the requirements. Delete select fire. Make it full auto only. Simpler. Fewer parts. Hyde went back to his drawing board. 3 weeks later, he had the T-20. 2 stamped steel tubes welded together to form the receiver. A bolt that rode on 2 guide rods instead of fitting tight inside the receiver. The guide rods did the work. The receiver was just a tube. No precision machining required. A barrel that screwed in with a spring-loaded retainer. No threading. No careful fitting. A wire stock that collapsed. A magazine copied from the British Sten. 30 rounds. Single feed. The whole gun was 73 parts. Only 2 required machining. The bolt and the barrel. Everything else was stamped or welded. November 1942. 5 T-20 prototypes went to Aberdeen Proving Ground. Infantry Board tested them. Airborne Command tested them. Armored Forces Board tested them. They fired 5,000 rounds. 2 malfunctions total, both from bad magazines. The gun itself ran. They tested it in mud. It ran. They tested it in dust. It ran. They tested it in conditions that jammed Thompsons. It ran. December 24, 1942. The Ordnance Department recommended adoption. January 11, 1943. Official approval. U.S. submachine gun caliber .45 M3. General Motors Guide Lamp Division got the contract. 300,000 units. Guide lamp made headlights. They just finished making 1 million Liberator pistols. They had the stamping equipment. They had the welding equipment. They had the workers who knew how to turn sheet metal into functional objects. What they didn't have was gunsmiths. They didn't need them. May 1943. First production M3s rolled off the line. The workers called them grease guns immediately. The resemblance was unmistakable. That tube shape, that trigger guard that looked like a handle, that whole aesthetic that screamed mechanics tool, not military weapon. The name stuck. By 1943, Guide Lamp was producing 85,130 minutes and 3 seconds. Each one cost $20.94. The Thompson at that point cost between $45 and $108 depending on which variant and which factory. The M3 weighed 8.2 pounds empty. The Thompson weighed over 10. The M3 was 22.8 inches with the stock collapsed. The Thompson was 32 inches. For a tank crew working in a space the size of a phone booth, the difference mattered. You could hang the M3 on a rack inside the turret. You could grab it fast. You could swing it without hitting your loader in the face. The M3 fired 450 rounds per minute. The Thompson fired 600 to 700. That sounds like a disadvantage until you try to control full auto fire. The slower rate meant the M3 was easier to keep on target. You could almost fire single shots by feathering the trigger. The lighter bolt and lower rate of fire meant less recoil, less muzzle climb, more hits. But the gun had problems. February 1944. Reports started coming from training camps. The cocking handle was breaking. The handle was a little crank on the right side of the receiver. You turned it to pull the bolt back. The crank was stamped metal. When soldiers cranked it hard or dropped the gun on that side, the crank bent or snapped off. No crank meant no way to cock the bolt. No way to cock the bolt meant a $20 paperweight. The Ordnance Department investigated. They found the steel in the crank was wrong. Low grade. Poorly heat treated. They fixed it in production, but thousands of M3s were already in the field with bad cranks. Soldiers started breaking them off by accident. Some broke them on purpose because they didn't trust them anyway. Army ordnance companies had no spare parts. The M3 was designed to be disposable. No parts. No tools. No repair manual. Mechanics improvised. Third Army mechanics in France and Belgium started drilling holes in the bolt and adding a steel finger pull. Field modification. Unauthorized. Effective. The National Military History Museum in Luxembourg has 5 M3s with this modification. All from Patton's Third Army. All from late 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge, when every gun mattered and nobody cared about unauthorized modifications. Meanwhile, back in Anderson, Indiana, engineers were already working on a fix. April 1944. They started the M3A1 program. Delete the cocking handle entirely. Machine a slot in the bolt. Cock the gun by sticking your finger in the ejection port and pulling the bolt back. No handle to break. No springs to fail. Your finger was the charging handle. They made other changes. Enlarged the ejection port so your finger fit easier. Added a guard around the magazine release because soldiers kept hitting it by accident and dropping magazines. Strengthened the rear sight. Added a loading tool welded to the stock because the single-feed magazines were held to load by hand. Made the stock work as a barrel wrench. December 21, 1944. The M3A1 was adopted. Production started immediately. But the war was almost over. The M3's combat debut came earlier, June 6, 1944. Today, paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne jumped into Normandy in the dark. Some carried M3 grease guns. First combat use. The gun was compact, 22 inches with the stock folded, under 9 pounds loaded. Perfect for a paratrooper who needed one hand for his reserve shoot and had to land in a tree or a field and fight immediately. The airborne had mixed feelings. Some preferred the M1A1 carbine. Longer range. More accurate. Semi-auto meant you could take aimed shots. But the M3 had advantages. 30-round magazine versus the carbine's 15. Full auto versus semi. .45 ACP hit harder than .30 carbine at close range. In a hedgerow at night when a German was 10 feet away, the M3 won. By late 1944, the M3 was showing up everywhere. Tank crews loved it. The collapsible stock meant it fit in the tight spaces inside a Sherman. You could hang it by the turret. Grab it fast if infantry tried to climb on your tank. The slow rate of fire meant you weren't wasting ammunition. 30 rounds lasted longer at 450 rounds per minute than at 700. Truck drivers got them. MPs got them. Rear echelon troops got them. Anyone who needed a compact weapon for close quarters. The gun looked cheap. Felt cheap. Soldiers called it other names besides grease gun. Plumber's nightmare. Cake decorator. Sheet metal special. But it worked. November 5, 1944. Corporal Carlton Chapman of the 761st Tank Battalion sat in his Sherman near Nancy, France. His M3 was visible through the turret hatch. He'd used it twice already. Once when infantry rushed his tank in the dark. Once when his tank threw a track and he had to guard it while the crew made repairs. Both times the M3 fired when he needed it to fire. Both times it stopped what needed stopping. That was all that mattered. The German perspective came from unexpected sources. Captured M3s were tested. German ordnance officers examined the construction. They were looking for weakness, manufacturing shortcuts that indicated American industrial desperation. What they found confused them. The gun was crude, but it worked. The stamped receiver should have been weak. It wasn't. The spot welds should have failed under stress. They didn't. The simple blowback action with minimal parts should have jammed constantly. It fired thousands of rounds between cleanings. One German report noted the Americans had achieved reliability through simplicity rather than precision. The Germans built the MP40 with similar principles, but the M3 was cruder still. Less machining, more stamping, cheaper materials. Yet it functioned. The report concluded American manufacturing capability had reached the point where they could produce functional weapons from methods that should have produced junk. The Americans weren't making better weapons. They were making adequate weapons faster than Germany could make anything. By 1944, Guide Lamp was producing 343,372 minutes and 3 seconds. One factory. 1 year. More than 250,000 submachine guns that cost $20 each. The Thompson production that year was ending. February 1944. Last Thompson orders. The M3 was replacing it not because the M3 was better, but because America could make 15 M3s for the cost of one Thompson. Arithmetic 1. In 1945, Guide Lamp produced 178,192 minutes and 3 seconds and 15,469 M3A1s. Total production by war's end was 622,163 units. The M3A1 arrived too late to see much combat in World War II. Only 15,469 made it before VJ Day. But the design was superior. No cocking handle to break. Finger in the bolt to cock it. Simpler. More reliable. Soldiers who used the M3A1 preferred it to the M3. The few who got them in 1945 kept them. The war ended. The M3 should have ended with it. Disposable guns get disposed of. But the M3 stayed. The Army had over 600,000 of them. They worked. They were already in inventory. Why replace them? The M3 and M3A1 became the standard U.S. submachine gun. Korea. The M3A1 showed up in both. Helicopter crews carried them. Tank crews carried them. Special operations used suppressed versions. The OSS had suppressors made by Bell Laboratories during the war. Quiet. Effective. Subsonic .45 ACP was already quiet. Add a suppressor and the loudest sound was the bolt cycling. The M3A1 became a favorite of units that needed to kill quietly. 1957. The M14 rifle was adopted. The M14 was supposed to replace the M1 Garand, the M1 carbine, the Browning automatic rifle, and the M3A1. Universal infantry weapon. One gun for every role. It didn't work. The M14 in full auto was uncontrollable. The 7.62 mm NATO cartridge hit too hard. Muzzle climb was extreme. The M14 couldn't replace the submachine gun role. The M3A1 stayed in inventory. Officially retired from frontline service. Actually still issued to tank crews and drivers. 1991. Gulf War. The 19th Engineering Battalion deployed to Kuwait with M3A1 submachine guns. The guns were older than the soldiers carrying them. Some were 46 years old. Made in 1945. Still functioning. Still reliable. Still doing what they were designed to do, which was give vehicle crews a compact weapon that worked when they needed it. Some National Guard M60 tanks had M3A1s in their turrets until 1997. 52 years after manufacture. The gun outlasted the Thompson. Outlasted the M1 carbine. Outlasted the M14 in the submachine gun role. Outlasted almost everything else from World War II. Not because it was beautiful. Not because it was precise. Because it was simple, and simple doesn't break. The M3 grease gun represents a specific kind of American pragmatism. The kind that looks at a problem and solves it with the minimum necessary solution instead of the most elegant one. The Thompson was elegant. Machined perfection. Gorgeous. Expensive. The M3 was ugly. Stamped adequacy. Both fired the same round. Both killed the same enemy. One cost 10 times as much and took 10 times as long to make. The choice was obvious when production numbers mattered more than aesthetics. George Hyde died in 1963 in Brooklyn. He never became famous. Gun designers rarely do unless their names are on the patent like Colt or Browning. Hyde designed the FP-45 Liberator, the M2 Hyde submachine gun, the M3 grease gun. Millions of guns. Millions of dollars saved. Countless lives protected by weapons that existed because he knew how to make guns from sheet metal and spot welds. Frederick Sampson went back to General Motors after the war. Chief engineer. Production specialist. He turned car parts into weapons when the country needed them. Turned weapons back into car parts when the war ended. His contribution was industrial, not martial. He made Hyde's designs manufacturable. Made 600,000 guns possible in 3 years. The M3 is in museums now. Veterans of foreign wars posts have them on walls. Collectors pay premium prices for transferable examples. The military finally retired the last ones in the 1990s. But for 50 years the grease gun was there. Tank turrets. Helicopter cockpits. Armored vehicles. Anywhere space was tight and reliability mattered more than looks. The gun proved you don't need perfection when adequacy shows up in sufficient numbers. You don't need beauty when function arrives on time. The M3 was never going to win awards for aesthetics. It won by existing in the quantities needed when needed. Simple math. Simple engineering. Profound impact. The lesson isn't about guns specifically. It's about solving problems with the right tool, not the best tool. The Thompson was the best submachine gun America could make in 1940. The M3 was the right submachine gun America could make in 1943. The difference was 500,000 additional weapons in the field when they were needed. Sometimes good enough in quantity beats perfect in scarcity. The M3 grease gun proved that principle in the most brutal testing ground possible. It proved it for 50 years across 4 wars and countless smaller conflicts. Not bad for something that looked like it belonged in a mechanic's toolbox. If you want more forgotten stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us which story you want to hear next.